The deadline for that affidavit was towards the end of November. Extensions were asked, and we had agreed amicably with the legal representatives from Ms. Nainu that they could submit, but they should submit on a particular date. Well, that also didn't happen, so we only received it yesterday. So in the light of that, Chairperson, we are in a predicament from our side to proceed with her evidence today. I have communicated with the attorney in particular. I don't think he will be here this morning. We had indicated to him that he will start later because we will start with Mr. Khoza this morning. So what we will be requesting from the chairperson is to have Ms. Naidu's evidence postponed to a later date. And
Does Ms. Naidu know why the affidavit was not ready on time so that we could have proceeded today?
I don't know whether she knows, Chairperson. I haven't...
Is she here?
I don't think she is. No. I see the shaking of heads, Chairperson. I don't think she is here. I haven't dealt with her directly.
Well, let's deal with Mr. Khoza's evidence. And then when we finish with it, then you can raise the matter of Ms. Naidu again.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
On Ms. Khoza, Chairperson, he is represented by Mr. Cooper, and I would like him to place himself on record.
Mr. Cooper, would you like to place yourself on record? You can do it from where you are if you are able to.
Yes, good morning, Chair. It's Zithembe Cooper from the firm Kambonani Cooper, and I'm Mr. Khoza's attorney.
Okay, no, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
There was also an aspect Mr. Cooper and I were discussing before we start.
Yes.
It's about also a default in regard to the filing of Mr. Khoza's affidavit on transactions. Mr. Khoza has duly cooperated and filed an affidavit on the suspensions, and we followed up in regard to the transactions, but that hasn't been forthcoming. And the intention was we could touch on both the suspensions and the transactions today, that the failure to file on the transactions impacts on that plan. And perhaps Mr. Cooper could address the chairperson.
When was he supposed to let the commission have his affidavit?
The date was, the first date given, Chairperson, was the 16th of November. Oh, on the 16th of November, I beg your pardon, he was given a request for information with a due date of the 1st of December to file the affidavit. Mr. Cooper can confirm that as well. I don't...
Well, Mr. Cooper, do you want to say something about the failure to file an affidavit dealing with transactions so far?
Yes, Chair, thanks. So, Chair, the position of Mr. Khoza has always been that he, in conjunction with our firm, have been in the process of preparing an affidavit. The latest request for information, which Mr. Seleka and his team sent to Mr. Khoza, it traversed many issues, not only the transactions which Mr. Seleka is speaking about, but there's probably about 10 other subject matters. And that extends to a subject matter which Mr. Khoza is not offhand familiar with, and it would require us to go through archives of documentation and source information and then prepare something. As of the 25th of November, we did communicate to the Commission that at this stage, Mr. Khoza was not in a position to file an affidavit, and we would, once we have consulted with Mr. Khoza further, let the Commission know of our position. On the 30th of November, we did receive a summons from the Commission, and in the summons it advised that Mr. Khoza was required to appear at the Commission on today, and to address the affidavit which he has submitted to the Commission, and that affidavit being the affidavit on the suspension of the executives, together with the issues arising therefrom. So on that basis, we were under the assumption that Mr. Khoza would be asked to come here today to address his affidavit. And we weren't aware, and we would have thought that we had made the Commission aware that we hadn't filed anything, and we were not yet of a certainty to file an affidavit on the other issues. And I must say again, it's not merely just those 2 transactions, those prepayments, but there's approximately 10 other issues and 10 isolated separate issues. So that, unfortunately, that is our position today, and I can't take it much further.
I suspect that the 10 other issues you talk about would fall under the topic of transactions that Mr. Selega is talking about. Yeah, Mr. Cooper.
Chair, if you just allow me to read some of the issues which arise in that in those other topics. Okay. So some of the other issues are the addendum to the Hendrina coal supply agreement, naturally the guarantees, and thereafter we go on to the T-Systems contract. We talk about the Eskom and McKinsey corporate plan.
Yeah, all of those fall under transactions. But it's fine. It's okay. What I do gather from what you say and what Mr. Selega has said is that Mr. Khoza is giving his cooperation to the Commission. There may have been some hitches and misunderstanding about what his evidence would cover today, and you may be needing more. You may have needed more time to prepare an affidavit that deals with other matters. That's what I'm gathering. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair. That's our position.
Yes. I think that it's fine. We'll cover the suspensions today.
Yes.
But you and Mr. Selega must finalize the date by when the other affidavit must be filed. And if you don't reach agreement, then I will fix the date. We don't have time. The Commission is running out of time for oral evidence. We were meant to finish all oral evidence by end of this year, which is end of this month, effectively next week. We find ourselves having to go into next year in regard to some witnesses which we wanted to avoid. There are serious time constraints. So that should just be borne in mind in trying to assist the Commission with your affidavit and also on the deadline, so it shouldn't be too long. Okay? All right. Okay, Mr. Selega.
Thank you, Chair.
Let's continue.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose Mr. Khoza will be prepared to take the affirmation or the oath.
Yes, please administer the oath or affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
Zithembe Wilfred Khoza.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear that the evidence will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you, Mr. Khoza. You may be seated.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, we will use the bundle, Eskom Bundle 14. Eskom Bundle 14,
Yeah.
and Mr. Khoza's exhibit affidavit is found in Exhibit U30. You found it, Mr. Khoza. Mr. Khoza, the affidavit starts on page 273. Now, that's the black pagination on the top left-hand corner. Please assist Mr. Khoza quickly.
Yes, correct.
You found it there. Thank you. So the affidavit starts there. It runs up to page 286.
Yeah, that's correct.
You see that? There's a signature there by the deponent. Is that your signature?
Correct.
You confirm that. The affidavit is dated 21 October 2020. You confirm that this is your affidavit, Mr. Khoza?
Confirmed.
Thank you. Chairperson, I'll beg leave to have the affidavit admitted as Exhibit U30.1.
The affidavit of Mr. Zithembe Wilfred Khoza, starting at page 273, is admitted as Exhibit U34.1.
30, Chairperson.
30.
Yeah, 30. I beg your
Okay,
pardon.
that will be U30.1.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Khoza, just by way of a background, we will then, as you've heard this morning being discussed, confine ourselves for now to the issue of suspensions. A lot of evidence has been laid already before the Commission, and most of which has become common cause, if one looks at the evidence. So just by way of a background, Mr. Khoza, we see from the evidence that you were one of the board members newly appointed to the Eskom board on the 11th of December 2014.
That's correct.
Yeah. Could you tell the chairperson, how did you become appointed to serve on the board?
Okay, we were, as I said, I retired from Telkom.
Please address the chairperson.
I retired from Telkom, and since Telkom was a public service, quite a number of people knew me, and I received quite a number of requests to serve on the board for public and private, and Eskom was one of them. I used to accept the nomination and submit my CV, and that's what I did even on Eskom, and then I received the invitation to serve in Eskom from the minister.
So you received nominations to serve.
Yes.
Where would you have received the nominations from?
As I said, I received quite a number of them, even though I can't recall an individual, but I did fill up the documentation. It should be available because I didn't keep a copy at the time.
So prior to, or at the time when you were appointed to serve on the board of Eskom, where were you working?
No, I was retired at home.
You were retired.
And I was doing just small construction work as a subcontractors on existing contractors.
And prior to your retirement, where were you?
I was working at Telkom SA.
Did you, in what position?
I serve as a managing executive for customer services.
Did you know any of the board members you served with at Eskom prior to your appointment?
And not really. The only person that I met during our was Mark Pamensky. Mark Pamensky was working for Blue Label at the time, and Blue Label was distributing our prepaid cards and prepaid phones. So now and then, maybe once a year, we used to meet with all the distributors to get their concerns and also to set the targets for the other year.
So you came to know him in those interactions?
Yes, professionally I knew him there.
Did you know Dr. Ngubani?
No, I didn't know Dr. Ngubane personally or ever work with him close. I knew him as a chairperson and as a premier and as a minister.
A chairperson of?
SABC.
But you never knew him personally?
No.
Did you know Mr. Kumalo, Romeo Kumalo?
No, I knew Mr. Kumalo as he was at Vodacom and he was a competitor. So now and then we used to monitor how they do the business.
But did you know him?
Not personally. I never met or talked to him.
You never met with him?
Oh, no.
Ms. Vanita Klein?
No, we haven't met.
Ms. Viroshni Naidu?
No, we didn't meet.
Miriam Custom?
No.
I think, didn't he say, Mr. Selega, he only knew Mr. Pamensky?
Mr.
Out of the
Pamensky.
board members, he didn't know them. Is that correct, Mr. Khoza?
That's correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Did you know the Gupta brothers?
No.
You never dealt with them?
No, I never met them.
You never met them?
No.
Have you ever spoke with them on the phone?
No.
You know the evidence of Mr. Kulane Khoma?
Yes.
That at the board meeting where Mr. Koko was about to be suspended, you walked out and called one of the Gupta brothers. And after you called him, the Gupta brother called the minister, Minister Brown. Minister Brown then called Dr. Ngubani, who apparently communicated to him that Mr. Koko should not be suspended. And that is what happened.
Chair, if I may interject for a second.
Yeah.
Chair, the question Mr. Seleka is asking Mr. Khoza is something that was put to Mr. Khoza a few days ago, probably a week, in the form of that affidavit. And we haven't addressed that affidavit. And Mr. Khoza is intent on addressing that affidavit, the specific one of Mr. Khoma. So if I may suggest it on Mr. Khoza's behalf, that perhaps that be something that is also addressed. And I was under the impression that we were just discussing the suspension issue.
Well, the suspensions would include that type of question. Mr. Selega?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I communicated with the attorneys for Mr. Khoza a while back before we formally got the affidavit from Mr. Khoma. That while back included the evidence of Mr. Khoma at the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee. And I forewarned that this issue will be pursued but we will be provided with an affidavit in due course by Mr. Khoza, which we did, fine, and we gave it to him, but the information had already been shared with them because Mr. Khoza doesn't say anything different in the affidavit here. But this is relevant to the suspension, Chairperson, in this way. And I don't know why.
What is the story about a request for an affidavit that, as I understand, Mr. Coopers, seems to be recent? Was the request for an affidavit recent?
No, at the very beginning, Chairperson, in my email correspondence, I had requested that this issue be addressed.
Yeah, in his affidavit.
In Mr. Khoza's affidavit.
Yeah. So before he filed this affidavit?
Before he files this affidavit, because
Yes.
I had communication directly with Mr. Khoza prior to him invoking.
Being represented.
Yes. But I
Yes.
sent the email to both ultimately,
Yeah.
which they saw, and the issue was pertinently raised as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Mr. Cooper, what do you say? Mr. Selega says before this affidavit was filed, he had raised the issue directly with Mr. Khoza in an email to say this issue should be addressed in the affidavit. I didn't see anything addressing it in the affidavit, but obviously that can't be a reason for the question not to be asked.
Chair, we're not suggesting that any question should not be asked, just for a matter of housekeeping. Mr. Khoza's affidavit was given to Mr. Khoza, but not with an accompanying Rule 33 notice requesting him to address it. And perhaps by coincidence, yesterday we sent correspondence to Mr. Seleka and his team requesting them to let us know if they expect Mr. Khoza to address Mr. Khoza's affidavit.
If they had raised it, obviously it needed to be addressed, isn't it?
Well, I would have expected, or Mr. Khoza would have expected a Rule 3 notice to be accompanied as it was in previous times. And based off of those Rule 3 notices, that was when we responded with an affidavit addressing and those specific affidavits which are attached to those Rule 3 notices. On this occasion, however, we didn't receive anything. And
Yeah, okay. As long as he was alerted that this would be raised, I will allow that question. Because what's important is that you have an idea what you will be questioned about. Okay, let's carry on. So I will allow that question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Mr. Khoza, that's the question. Should I repeat it, or you know the question? In fact, I believe Mr. Khoza says you were the one who told him the story.
That's not correct. I addressed the same issue because the first time I heard about the issue was in a portfolio committee inquiry, and I did indicate to say I never said it and I never done it.
That is the allegation that when Mr. Koko was before the committee, that would have been the PNG committee. Oh,
That's the board chairperson.
or the board, he was before the board.
Yeah, he was about to be suspended.
Yeah.
The board had called him for suspension. And
Were they not called before the committee rather than the board? I was under the impression that the executives who were suspended were called before the PNG committee rather than the board.
Oh, not that suspension, Chair.
Or another suspension?
It's a different suspension.
Oh, okay, okay.
After Mr. Koko had come back from this one, Mr. Khoza, you could assist there because apparently...
Well, if it was another suspension, not the suspension that I'm talking about,
Yes.
then it may well be that you may be going out of the scope, because I'm talking about these suspensions
Yes.
of the executives, and Koko Mr. Koko was one of them. So
Yes.
if it was a separate suspension that has got nothing to do with the suspension of the executives on the 11th of March, then the question might be falling outside these suspensions. So, I thought you were talking about these suspensions.
No, it was raised only to show the connection with the Gupta brothers chairperson, not for the suspension per se, but that Mr. Khoza might have had some communication directly with the Gupta brothers. Yes.
Yeah. Well, maybe when he comes back, you can deal with
Can
it.
deal with that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Khoza, and you will address it further in your affidavit in due course.
Okay.
Yeah. Have you had any dealings with Mr. Salim Essa or any interaction with him?
No interaction.
Now let's deal with quickly the suspension issues. We understand that the board, which started on the 11th of December 2014, had its induction on the 26th, or is it the 16th of January 2015. That board had a scheduled meeting on the 26th of February 2015. You recall that?
Yes,
And that meeting was cancelled on short notice.
correct.
The next meeting the board would have, which was a special meeting, was called on the 9th, convened on the 9th of March 2015. Remember that?
That's correct.
And this,
Well, Mr. Selek, I don't know if there is much with regard to the meeting of the 9th that you really want to explore.
No.
Why don't you go straight to the 11th?
Yes,
Or
I'm
the
just
10th and
following the
11th?
sequence.
Yeah, let's go to the real issues.
Should we go to the,
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And in that meeting, the meeting of the 9th, or the attitude of the board on the 9th, caused ultimately the meeting to be called with the minister on the 11th of March 2015. Recall that?
Yes,
Then in that meeting of the 11th, the minister comes. There are various meetings on the 11th, but the key meeting is a meeting where the minister is present. And you deal with that in your affidavit. And perhaps you could then relate to the chairperson what, in your recollection, did the minister discuss with the board?
The minister came to the meeting, and the key issues that the minister discussed, it was a concern in terms of the operations of Eskom. The issue of the load shedding was affecting the country, the economy, and the people of South Africa. The second one, the financial issues at the time, the minister stated that he received an email or an advice to say Eskom might unable to pay the salaries by end of March, and all other financial constraints that the company existed at the time. The minister felt that we need to do a deep dive into organization so that we understand the issues on a first-hand basis, and we're able to resolve the issues. And the areas that were identified that the minister spoke to, he spoke about the finance, he spoke about the load shedding, he spoke about the delay in a build program, which have yielded to the huge cost. He spoke about the issues that were taking place in procurement that has been on the media or been a concern in the organization and the functioning of the organization at the time. And the investigation should not be interfered by management. It's supposed to be seen to be independent and give the board the basis to understand. Minister further stated that he's not there to tell the board what to do, but it's up to the board to apply their mind to do a deep dive in the organization so that they understand the issues on a first-hand basis.
So there seems to be an ambivalence in what you're saying about the minister there. On the one hand, he says she can dictate to the board. On the other, you have said that she identifies certain areas within Eskom which she considered problematic. She said the executives should not impede the inquiry. And you ultimately say, although she did not direct, it was clear that she wanted the board to read between the lines.
That's correct.
And what do you think you needed to read between the lines?
Because, as I said, the first meeting of the 9th, the chairperson did address us about the issues that were taking place in the organization. And it did mention the issue of having an inquiry which is unfair, and that is going to be seen to be credible, according to the words of the chairperson. And we felt at the time we did not have enough time ourselves as a board to deliberate issues amongst ourselves. We haven't even met as a board, as the board meeting was scheduled for the 26th. Therefore, we might not have enough information at hand. However, they insisted of the chairperson to say he's got instruction from the minister and the president at the time. Even some board members did argue, why then you don't just resolution to say, as per instruction from the shareholder, then we must do the inquiry, because we might not have enough information at the time. And we haven't set as a board to set up the strategy, how we're going to deal with the issues, how we're going to deal with the subcommittees, and engage the executives in terms of the issues that we have seen. We never debated them with the executives to find out the first-hand information. So as the minister went and spoke, in the same manner as the chairperson, that gave us the assurance to say the shareholder is aware.
Yeah, so in other words, when the minister came there, she was consistent with what Mr. Tsotsi has said in the meeting of the 9th.
That's correct.
Yeah. And that resulted then in the board deciding on the inquiry as well as the suspension of the executives.
That's correct.
So you had the confidence to do that after the minister had addressed you. You had the confidence to do so after the minister had addressed you.
That's correct.
I see that in paragraph 38, page 281 of your affidavit, you also say that it was the minister who raised concerns about the area of finance. That's 281, 38.
That's correct.
So is that what led to the suspension of the financial director?
That's correct.
Did the minister talk about suspension?
Even though it was not explicit, but the fact that the executive should be set aside so that the inquiry carries on with the full credibility.
Or did she talk about the executive or some members of the executive stepping aside?
It was said that the executive in an environment that going to be investigated needs to be set aside.
To step aside?
To step aside.
Did that come from the minister? Did that come from some of the board members?
No, it did in a salient point come up from the minister.
From the minister. Okay. At that stage, what was your understanding by the time the minister left the meeting, what was your understanding of how many executives would need to be suspended or would need to step aside? And who were those on your understanding?
In the understanding at the time, as it was presented before, it was supposed to be the CEO,
Mr. Matona?
Mr. Mantona, and Mr. Marukana, and Mr. Mashela.
It was supposed to be the three.
That's the three that was mentioned earlier
Yeah,
by the
during-
chairperson, but that was also the feeling when we left the meeting.
So, in the meeting of the board that took place before the minister came, was there a mention of the suspensions at that stage or not?
No, it was a mention of the environment which was affected.
Yes, but the stepping aside or suspension?
No, it was not on the
mentioned
9th.
as yet.
No,
It was, the stepping aside of executives was mentioned for the first time during the meeting with the minister.
that's correct.
Okay, and it was three executives who were to step aside, as you understood the position.
As
At
I
that
said,
stage.
even though it was not explicit,
Yes.
but it was the environment which was mentioned earlier that we
Yes.
had in mind,
Yes.
which led us to request the minister to come and address us.
Yes, but what I'm saying is, on your understanding, by the time the minister left, your understanding was that certain executives needed to step aside, is that right?
That's correct.
And that there were three of them, was that the correct number as you understood the position at that time?
That's correct.
Okay. And do you recall who they were at that time, or you didn't know their names, but you knew it was going to be three executives?
No, I didn't know their name at the time.
No, but you knew it was three.
Yeah.
Did you know to which portfolios they were attached at that stage? So which departments they were in charge of? Is that something you knew, or you are not, you can't remember?
At the time, it was not clear.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay, Mr. Selega.
Mr. Khoza, thank you, Chair. Mr. Khoza, maybe you need to clarify to the chairperson, because in your affidavit, it appears that when the minister left, 4 areas had been identified. And that even though some board members were against the suspension of the FD, because the minister had raised concerns in regard to it, you decided to have her suspended. So it seems after the minister had left, and I want you to clarify to the DCJ, is this correct? That when she left, you knew that she had raised 4 areas of concern, as opposed to only 3.
That's correct. The minister had a concern on 4 areas.
And are you saying at the time, you didn't know who occupied these areas?
That's correct.
But the finance director, you would have known, the CFO, because she was in the meeting on the 9th, she was in the meeting the 11th, which took place in the morning, so you would have known your finance director.
No, definitely you could know the individual. As I said, at the time, the FD, we knew the FD is a financial director.
Yes.
We knew the CEOs,
Yes.
that was the CEO. But what I'm saying, in the meeting that we had on the 9th, there was no name attached, and there was no talking about the suspension of the
I
executives.
see, okay, I see. No, fair enough, understand. But then on the 11th, you would have known, if these areas are the ones identified, then Mr. So-and-so is in that area, Mrs. So-and-so is in that area, so they are the ones susceptible to suspension.
That's correct.
Is that correct? Okay. Now, that's interesting from the point of view of what you say Mr. Tsotsi has said, because when Mr. Tsotsi was deliberating with the board, he says he had 3 persons in mind to step forward, for them to step aside. You recall that?
Yes,
That he had 3 persons in mind.
that's correct.
When the minister leaves the meeting after the 11th, now there's 4 persons to be suspended. I mean, there's a talk between the board about the 4th person, but ultimately she also gets suspended. You remember that?
That's correct.
Now, Mr. Tsotsi, on his evidence, says his instructions came from a meeting in Durban, where he met with the president and Ms. Dudumyeni. That is, President Jacob Zuma at the time and Ms. Dudumyeni. And he was given 3 names there. Remember, he came to the meeting and said, it's an instruction from the president.
That's correct.
The outcome of the meeting of the 11th is curious in this sense. On the evidence of Ms. Suzanne Daniels, she says on the 10th, she's called to Melrose Arch. You would have heard her evidence.
Yes, I had.
Yeah. She's called to Melrose Arch by Mr. Koku, and there she meets with Mr. Koku and Mr. Salim Essa. And in that meeting, being asked about the process for suspensions, she's also told 4 executives will be suspended. 4, not 3. And the names are given. It turned out to be exactly the executives that the board will ultimately suspend. And Salim Essa, apparently, according to Ms. Suzanne Daniels, introduced himself to her as the minister's advisor, Minister Lynn Brown's advisor. So is it a coincidence that the minister comes to the meeting and articulates not 3, but 4 areas of concern, which is consistent with what Ms. Suzanne Daniels said she was told at Melrose Arch? Is it a coincidence or is it the orchestration? What do you say to the chairperson?
I don't think I can comment on that because the minister, I think, spoke as a shareholder, and when he mentioned the issues about the finance, she was specific to say she received a request or instruction or a say which state that they might unable to pay the salaries by the end of March. So that was a specific issue that she mentioned. So what is her mind and what Suzanne Daniel comes up, I don't think I qualify to comment on that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of course, you would be concerned, would you not, if somebody from outside of Eskom knew on the 10th of March that certain executives were to be suspended, and that is somebody outside of Eskom, outside of government, and was, according to Ms. Daniels, asking for advice as to what procedures should be followed if you want to suspend executives at Eskom. You would be concerned about that, wouldn't you?
Yes, definitely will be concerned about that.
Because at that stage, you as a member of the board didn't know anything about any plans for the suspension of any executives, is that on the 10th?
That's correct.
Yes. Yes, okay. All right.
Thank you,
Mr.
Chair.
Sullivan.
Yeah. And you see, Ms. Daniels tells one of the executives, would-be suspended executives, about what she had been told at Melrose Arch. Mr. Dan Marukani, who in turn tells Ms. Tulufelo Molefe, and this happens the night before. So at the dawn of the 11th of March 2015, these people know only by reason of that they are going, they might be suspended or they will be suspended. But Mr. Khoza, did you as the board question the minister in regard to the suspensions?
I think because the minister did not explicitly said, so and so and so and so needs to be suspended or be suspended. He left it to the board to apply their mind and make their decisions. And even state that he's going to be around and available to hear, or if we need him, we need her. It's difficult to create that opinion.
Well, Mr. Khoza, it's clear from your affidavit, is it not, that even though the minister may not have expressly said there should be suspensions, it's clear from your affidavit that your understanding was that that's the direction the minister wanted the board to take.
Yes, it was my opinion.
Yes, yes. So if you thought that the minister wanted the board to take a certain direction, you would be entitled to question the minister on that, isn't it? Because you would be able to say, Minister, I hear that you say you don't intend to instruct the board as to what it should do, and then it should apply its mind to the issues and make its decision. But when you say A, B, C, D, it's clear that as far as you are concerned, there should be suspensions, and then question him. Wouldn't you have been able to say to do that?
That's correct. I think maybe at the time we did not ask such questions.
Yes.
There was a lot of debate with the minister and other questions that we asked the minister.
Yes.
But maybe I don't recall us going across like that.
Yeah, you see, part of the concern that I have is that what does come out of your affidavit, which I've read, as well as the evidence of some of the board members, including Dr. Ngubane, is that one gets the impression that maybe the whole board or some members of the board thought, well, if that's what the shareholder wants, if that's what the minister wants, then we'll fall in line without interrogating the need for certain things to be done and the justifiability of those things being done. What do you say to that?
That's correct. As I said, on the 9th, when we questioned the chairperson, it was explicit to say it's an instruction, and it's instruction from the shareholder and the presidency. So that's where we felt uncomfortable to say, is it correct? Is it definitely the minister? And the minister, then we find it's better to call the minister, as we cannot question the president, because it's our shareholder and was available in our meeting, on the induction meeting, and was willing to discuss the issues with us. So when it comes like that, one will form opinion to say, since it was instruction, and we have verified that the minister is aware of the environment and the possible suspensions, that is sufficient. And the fact that he left it to the board to say he cannot instruct the board or dictate what the board is supposed to do, is up to the board to deliberate and come with it. So I felt that this was left up to us as a board to make decisions.
Yes, Mr. Selega.
Yeah. So you're saying to the chairperson, ultimately the decision was the board's decision?
That's correct.
Even though the platform for the decision-making was created by the minister. She gave you the platform on which you could make the decision, but telling you of the problematic areas.
As I said, the chairperson and the minister speak from the position of authority.
Yes.
Then they can really influence.
Well, one of the points you made earlier on was that on the 9th, you or some members of the board felt that they were still too new at Eskom, which was true, was it not?
That's correct.
Yes. You probably still needed quite some time to understand how Eskom works and to understand all the issues. Don't you feel so?
We did, but when we looked at the MOU, which said if maybe the company is not operating efficiently, it's got financial difficulties, the minister can intervene or the shareholder can intervene. In my view, I see that in that point of view, to say maybe that's an intervention which is required to address the situation at the time.
Of course, if that is the situation, then the minister would instruct you, isn't it? If it's a situation, if it's a situation which is provided for in the memorandum of incorporation, then he can say this is what must be done. But here she was not saying that. She was saying, I'm not instructing you. So obviously it was not that situation. Do you not agree?
I do agree, but taking into account that we were just been appointed, and maybe it was the first time when, before we even interact as a board, the chairperson presented this dilemma, and now we're meeting the minister. Maybe because of that, we could not have developed such good dialogues with the minister. So we felt that because the chairperson already laid down the grounds and indicated that it was instruction,
Which the minister was not confirming.
even though that,
You
that-
said the minister said, I'm not instructing you.
as I said, technically and politically, you can pass the statement without being committed crime.
But are you able to say the minister confirmed that, confirmed what Mr. Tozi had told you on the 9th, namely that she was instructing you, the board, to do A, B, C, D? Are you able to say that?
No, I can't say that. But
So
what I
therefore,
said,
what Mr. Tozi said on the 9th, namely there was an instruction from the minister, to the extent that he said that, that was not confirmed by the minister expressly, at least.
exactly.
Yeah, but are you able to say impliedly she did confirm it? Or are you not able to say that?
I can say so.
Okay, all right. Okay, let's move on, Mr. Selega.
So the executives get suspended and they are paid to stay at home. Mr. Khoza, is that right? They were suspended on full pay. They were suspended on full pay.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. And they write letters, at least two of them write letters, but one of them takes you to court and takes you to the CCMA. The indication is they want to come back to work. They want to come back to their employment. But instead, the board engages in what you refer to as exit meetings in your affidavit. What was the reason for exiting them?
As I said, one of the board members, I think it was Mr. Kumalo, raised it in our meeting to say he had interacted with some of the executives and the intent or the inclination is that they would like to separate with the company as this was damaging their names in the market, and the inquiry was going to take long, up to 3 months, which they cannot keep their life on hold for so long. That was mentioned in a meeting, which led to a resolution by the board to say, if then, then we must look at the separation agreement. And there was a board meeting, and there was a round robin, which then requested the 3 of our members, executives, to engage on separation if need be.
Yeah, I have noticed in your affidavit, like other directors who have come to testify, they don't put a date when exactly was this indication made to them that the executives want to separate? Can you recall when?
I think the board resolution was on the 4th of May, if I'm not mistaken, or 4th or 5th of May.
Is that the resolution that authorized some of the board members to engage in discussions with the suspended executives?
That's correct.
Yes. Okay, yes, continue.
Yes, but you see, on the 4th of May already, meetings had been arranged. Let me put it this way. Before the 4th of May, Ms. Suzanne Daniel says she was instructed to arrange meetings for the 4th of May, where the executives would be engaged in what you refer to as exit meetings. So it seems to have been done before the 4th of May.
Okay. I can't comment on that Bill,
can't
because it's a
comment.
fact. If it's a fact, that's correct.
Yes. And Ms. Molefe has testified here in her affidavit also. She says, when I arrived at the meeting of the 4th of May, Mr. Khumalo did this opening statement that she understands that I want to separate from the company. And she says, but I told him no. You are misconstruing my letters to the company. I wanted the company to provide me with the terms of reference for this investigation that has been appointed. And because I hear conflicting views, give me the right reasons why you have suspended me. I don't want to leave. I want to come back. Were you in that meeting?
Yes, I was there.
You heard her say these things.
Yes, you said so.
So clearly, she wanted to come back because I see in your affidavit you say only Mr. Koko wanted to come back. So that can't be correct.
At that time.
So what I'm saying
Which
is...
time?
At the meeting of the 4th.
Yes.
At the meeting of the 4th,
She
Ms.
indicated she was not
Molefe
willing to
indicated that she wanted to come back.
Yeah.
You accept that?
Yes.
I also understood your affidavit to be suggesting that none of the executives, except for Mr. Koko, indicated that they wanted to come back. That was my understanding of your affidavit as well. Did I misunderstand it, or is there something that I'm missing?
I think it's a time lapse.
Yes.
Because eventually, I think the approach was she was willing to go later.
Yes, but
At that time,
at
on the
that
first,
first meeting, she
Yes.
didn't want.
yes.
Now, why didn't you, as representatives of the board, accept if she said, I want to come back, and say, okay, there's no problem with that. We don't have a problem with you coming back, as long as it is after the investigation has been completed, and stop the exit negotiations. Why didn't you do that?
I think after she mentioned that, there was not much discussion. I think the meeting stopped with her.
Well, that's not the recollection, my recollection of the evidence of one of the witnesses who was there. Is it Ms. Klein?
Yes.
Ms.
Yes.
Klein?
Yes, she was also there.
Yeah, and certainly Ms. Molefe, in her evidence, suggested that Mr. Romeo Khumalo kind of nudged her towards accepting that there should be discussions about her exit. Am I right, Mr. Selega?
You are correct, sir.
Yes. Do you remember that? I think Ms. Molefe said something like Mr. Romeo Khumalo said to her But something like, the inquiry, the investigation could take quite some time. So maybe we should talk about separation or your exit. Do you remember anything along those lines?
In my understanding, that was an opening statement which was made by Mr. Khumalo.
Oh,
Because he made an opening statement
Yes.
and then she had to respond.
yes, okay.
And after she responded, I think she was quite upset.
Yes.
And the meeting did not go further than that after
Yes,
that. But
yes.
initially, that was what the opening statement
Yes.
of Mr. Khumalo.
So are you saying that Mr. Khumalo did not, after Ms. Molefe had made her remarks, did not pursue the matter of discussing her possible exit
In my
on that day?
No, in my recollection, he did not insist after this, she
On that
mentioned
day.
it. It was part of his opening statement.
Yeah. Now, just tell me his opening statement as far as you are able to remember. What did he say?
I think he mentioned the suspensions and the difficulties that the board gone through and the fact that it was rushed to the executives and they understand that the executives are not comfortable, etc. And he indicated to say the inquiry might take a little bit longer than expected, and there are requests that has gone to the chairperson or said that people want to settle, and hence we came with the proposal for settlement,
That's the gist as you remember it.
as I recall it.
Yes, okay. So when did you have another meeting with Ms. Molefe or somebody from the board have another meeting?
Thereafter, I think there was a communication between the chairperson of the People and Governance, which is Veneta Clay, with her on the correspondence. The only time I saw a correspondence from her was on the 25th of May, which I then, at the time, responded to it on the 3rd of June.
Yes. So at what stage on your recollection did she indicate a willingness to leave? That is Ms. Molefe.
I think it was after the 3rd,
After the 3rd of June?
or after the 3rd of June.
Oh, okay. But in the meantime, there'd been a lot of toing and froing between herself
communication.
and communication between herself and Ms. Klein or Mr. Khumalo.
Especially with Ms. Klein,
Yeah.
because I think she was asking questions on the 25th of May of the settlement, of the
Yeah.
bonuses, et cetera, that was
Yes.
listed in that particular one.
Yes.
So it was just looking at the administration and the benefits that are associated with the settlement.
Yes.
Yeah.
But why did, I understand from your affidavit that the board, when it suspended the executives, as far as you know, had no problem with them coming back in due course.
That's correct.
So why then did the board want to spend money to facilitate their exit if they wanted to leave?
I thought maybe at the time, as I said, some of them did allude to their letters to say maybe the relationship between the board and themselves, they felt is broken. And they felt that maybe the board does not need them anymore. So based on that, I think that's where the decision was taken.
And do you think the board still needed them?
To my view, yes.
So why didn't it say to them, we need you, there is no need for you to go, there is no need for, why did it not take the view that Eskom doesn't have money, it's going through financial difficulties, there is no need for Eskom to spend money to facilitate the exit of people that it needs?
I think the agency that was expected, because they were suspended for 3 months pending the investigation. And the inquiry started quite earlier when the investigation was still carried on. And some of them were not prepared to wait till the end.
Yes, but
That's my understanding.
But then that's their problem, isn't it? If you as the board still needed them, still needed their services, and they wanted to leave, then there's their problem. Why should you give them money to leave when you don't want them to leave?
As I said, maybe because it was raised to say maybe the trust relationship has been broken. And
As far as the board was concerned, had the trust relationship been broken?
No, I think on the emails, on the correspondence, it was indicating to say that's how the executive felt. And so because that's how they felt, then the board have decided on that, what you call a round robin for the particular board members to go and engage them.
Well, I leave aside the question of which executive said that. I leave that aside for the time being. But you as the board didn't believe that there was any relationship that was broken or any trust that was broken. Am I right?
In terms of the investigation, that's correct.
Yes.
But in terms of the influence that was created by the chairperson at the BMO of the 9th, it indicated some issues about management that I think still needs to be addressed. And the fact that the chairperson said is a lot of issues that needs to be dealt with and is crafted in a document which was available, that does not need to charge individually at the time when we suspend them. I don't know whether those things does indeed influence the board, but at no stage we discussed the issue of charging individuals. Even though we did raise it on the 11th to say why we suspend them to say pending the investigation, or they just put aside. If we got issues, let us just charge them. But then the feeling at the time said we don't have enough information on that. So that might have created a perception.
Yes, but you as a board had not taken any view, had you?
No, we didn't take any view.
The relationship between the board and these executives had broken.
No, we didn't take a view or any resolution.
Yes. Actually, you didn't even discuss that aspect, did you?
No, we didn't.
You didn't.
Until we find that request and the discussion with Mr. Kumalo.
Yes. And then you took the decision that you must offer them money so that they could leave Eskom. Is that right, as a board?
That's correct. It was a normal settlement.
Yes. What were you settling?
According to the advice that we got at the time from the experts in HR or whatever, is just to say, normally if there is dispute of this particular nature, they go the settlement route. And the proposal of the settlement route was then discussed at the board, and the board agreed to 12 months and with certain benefits which they have. And
but the board had no dispute with these executives, as I understand the position. You enter into a settlement if there is a dispute, isn't it? To settle that dispute, isn't it?
That's correct.
Yes. What dispute was there between the board and these executives?
There was no dispute at the time because but the issue was that they are suspended and the executives were not happy for being suspended.
Yes. But
And,
otherwise there was no dispute.
That's correct.
And the board was going to be happy for them to come back. And I assume if at that time, after they had come back, the board had grounds to say some of them must be charged with misconduct, that would be a separate issue.
That's correct.
Yes. The suspension was never meant to be used to charge them in terms of misconduct.
That's correct.
Yes. So we come back to the question that I posed to Dr. Ngubane and Ms. Clay, that I don't understand why the board decided to spend as much money as it did, millions of rands, to pay these executives, these three executives, to get them to leave when they say and you say, certainly Dr. Ngubane says and you say, we had no problem with them coming back after the investigation had been completed. I mean, I'm sure you know this, having worked in the corporate world at high level, that an employer would pay an employee some money if the employer doesn't want the employee to continue. And the employee still wants to come back. So there you have that tension. The employer doesn't want this employee anymore. The employee wants to continue. So the employer then says, okay, I'm offering you so much. If you accept it, you must sign that you will resign, you will leave. So that's understandable. But where you as the board say to me, we didn't want them to leave. We were happy for them to come back. And yet you go ahead and pay as much money as you paid them for them to leave. I don't understand it. Are you able to defend this decision?
I'm not defending the decision. I think maybe the issues that took place, the noise that was on the media, and maybe dissatisfaction of the executives, and maybe led to the board when the letters were coming in, or whether people were talking to Romeo suggesting that they resolve to make sure that at least let's offer them the package with those who wants to go so that they can go.
But then nobody in the board, out of so many people, nobody says it doesn't make sense that we should pay people who we feel, who we have no problem coming back. We should pay them so much money. Why are we paying them? If they want to leave, let them leave. Let them resign like everybody resigns if they want to leave and explore other opportunities. We don't have to pay them. Why must we pay them? Nobody says that.
I think the challenge is that most of issues and debate took place on the 11th, on a day when they were suspended. There was a lot of disagreement between the board, between some of the board members and the chairperson, or did not agree with the process. However, eventually they agreed with the process. And when at the end of the day, the documentation that was supposed to be submitted, which Dr. Tsotsi said is available, does not come forth, I think that as well discouraged the board members. So, as I said, it can be a number of things that might have in the minds of people.
Well, you see, in the end, if the board makes a decision, they must be able to defend it. They must make decisions that they can't defend. You accept that?
I do.
But obviously, if at some stage they may have thought that they could defend a decision, but subsequently, on reflection, they feel that they can't defend it, they must be honest enough to say, look, having reflected on this, we can't defend it. We can see that we should not have made this decision. But obviously, if they feel that the decision was right, they must be able to continue to defend it. Okay? You accept that?
Accepted, yes.
Yes. What is your position as we talk? Are you able to defend the board's decision to suspend these executives at the time that they suspended them?
The decision to suspend the executive at the time when we suspended, as I said, it was
On the
based
information?
on the
did you have
information that
enough
was available.
information? Do
at
you
the-
have enough information and all of that processes? Did you, in terms of process, in terms of substantive validity of the decisions, do you feel that you are able to defend it? Or that it was defensible?
No, I think at this time when we suspended the executives, based on investigation that was going to take place, without charging them, I agree that we can defend that because it was a decision that we want to deep dive and understand what is happening in the organization. But maybe when they approach the executive come across as dissatisfied and wanted separation packages, maybe we did not go then apply our mind to say what was the position.
So when you look at the payment of these millions to the executives to leave, that's the part where you think the board might not have applied its mind.
Yes, because
Yes.
the feeling was said they're going to come back, and when then they request to cycle, maybe we just go with them.
Because you see, well, Dr. Ngubane conceded that even the suspensions, they should not have happened, if I recall correctly. And Mr. Selega will tell me if my recollection is incorrect, but I think he made that concession. Mr. Selega?
The concession, Chairperson?
Or on that the executives should not have been suspended.
No, he did. He
did,
said
yeah.
the board would lose in court, certainly, if
Yes.
these executives went to court.
But you see, part of the issue that the commission is looking at is why these executives were suspended. Who initiated these suspensions and why did they initiate them? You know, based on your own evidence, that the suspensions of the executives were not initiated from the board, by the board.
That's correct.
Mr. Tsotsi said he was called to a meeting in Durban at the president's official residence. That meeting took place on the 8th of March 2015. Mr. Dumyeni was there, and the president came into the meeting. There was Mr. Nick Linnell, and I think there was somebody else. There were two other people, I think, according to Mr. Linnell and Mr. Tsotsi, there was Mr. Dumyeni's son, and apparently there was also Mr. Maswangai or somebody. And that this is where Mr. Tsotsi was told for the first time about the idea that certain executives at Eskom should be suspended. And this way he was told about the need for an inquiry to be conducted. And he says that at the end of the meeting, or at some stage, Mr. Zuma asked him whether he knew which executives were to be suspended, and Mr. Tsotsi confirmed because those had been dealt with in the meeting. But he says at that stage it was only 3 and not 4. They did not include the financial director. So you ask yourself the question, where did Ms. Mieni take the idea, if Mr. Tsotsi's version is correct and if Mr. Linnell's version is correct, where did Mr. Mr. Dumieni get the idea that certain executives at Eskom should be suspended? Did she get it from the then President, Mr. Zuma? How did this idea come to Mr. Zuma? It doesn't appear like it's something that came from the minister, because according to Mr. Linnell and Mr. Tsotsi, at the end of that meeting, Mr. Zuma suggested that Mr. Tsotsi should introduce the idea of an inquiry and the suspensions to the board, and he would talk to the minister about it. So the two of them had homework to do. And I seem to have read in an affidavit by Minister Brown that she doesn't seem to have known about this issue.
That's right.
By the 8th at least. So the question arises, who outside of Eskom initiated these issues? The board of Eskom, being new as it was, initially it was disinclined to go along this route on the 9th, but once the minister confirmed in effect that this is what the board should at least consider, and say impliedly instructed the board to do, the board was prepared to go along, suspended these executives. But a month later, or before that, if Ms. Daniel's evidence is correct, and if Mr. Masango's evidence, Abraham Masango's evidence is correct, then on the 10th of March, one day before the board made this decision, Mr. Salim Essa knew that there were going to be suspensions, and he even knew who the executives were who were going to be suspended. He mentioned them to Ms. Daniels, and Mr. Koko knew about them if the evidence of Ms. Daniels and Mr. Abraham Masango is correct. And Ms. Mulefe's name had not been included in the Durban meeting, but on the 10th, Mr. Essa mentioned the financial director, so there were 4 names now. And then the minister comes to the meeting on the 11th. Now remember, you said in the board meeting that happened before the minister came on the 11th, the issue of suspensions was not discussed. So the minister came, and when the minister spoke, she spoke on the basis that executives who were in charge of 4 portfolios, I think you said she spoke about 4 portfolios, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
She didn't mention names, but the understanding was that the executives who were in charge of the portfolios concerned would need to step aside or something like that.
That's correct.
That's all right. But you did say at that stage there was a mention of 3, so you might need to clarify that. But other evidence is that the executives were in charge of 4 portfolios that the minister mentioned were the ones who were to face a possible suspension according to the minister. So, and this Mr. Essa, who mentioned 4 executives on the 10th, introduced himself, rightly or wrongly, to Ms. Daniels as an advisor to the minister. And the minister comes on the 11th and talks about and includes the finance portfolio as an area to be investigated, whereas in the Durban meeting, the finance portfolio had not been included. and therefore the financial director was not one of those contemplated. And then, about a month later, after the executives have been suspended, Mr. Brian Molefe is seconded to Eskom. But what you might not have known as the board, or some of you, or maybe the whole board, is what I was told by Mr. Hank Bester a few weeks ago in this commission, who says in 2014, he met with Mr. Salim Essa on something unrelated to Eskom. And I won't bother you with the details, but one of the things Mr. Salim Essa said was that they, whoever they were are very powerful. They already had decided who would be the next boss of Eskom. It would be Mr. Brian Molefe. Mr. Bester must wait and see, or something like that. And indeed, Mr. Brian Molefe becomes the next boss of Eskom. And then, of course, Mr. Anuj Singh follows him. And I've had evidence here. They are still going to come and put their side of the story, but I've had evidence from witnesses to say at certain stages during a certain period, both Mr. Anuj Singh and Mr. Brian Molefe used to go to the Gupta house, and they used to get some money from the Gupta house, which those people said they witnessed. So the question arises, was this board of which you were a member not being influenced, maybe manipulated from outside Eskom and from outside of government to make certain decisions, and it allowed itself to be manipulated like that?
Based on the evidence that you just laid, it is possible. It's unfortunate that maybe on the meeting of the 9th, the chairperson at the time, Mr. Tsotsi, did not mention where the information came from. Because if it was known that it was a question of Dudu Moyedi, which is not working for Eskom, the debate was going to be completely different. However, he came across as the information that he believes in it himself as a chairperson, that it comes from the shareholder. So, and it comes from the president. And those are the people that are shareholders of the company. So at the time, myself, I took it very serious to say the intervention of the shareholder and intervention of the president, it means there are issues. But if he mentioned that it was Dudu Moyeni and certain, as it comes on revelation, maybe the approach was going to be completely different, and maybe it was not going to lead to the suspension of the executive, if we knew the information. But with the information that we had at the time, and the verification that we tried ourselves to verify with the shareholder at the time, we thought it was enough. Then it means then the chairperson does have information, he does have a file which is sitting with him, as he stated, and to us, that is going to give us in the due course, and that the suspension of the executive is about us to understand the deep dive. We believe in him. And hence, then the suspension was done. The issue of the meetings of the 10th, also we were not aware, it was never brought into our attention, we were not aware of it. Maybe if we were aware of it, then maybe the tone of the meeting of the 11th was going to be completely different.
But if that evidence is true, namely about that meeting, those two meetings of the 10th, one involving Mr. Abraham Masango and Mr. Koko and Mr. Salim Essa, the other one involving Ms. Daniels and Mr. Koko and Mr. Salim Essa at Melrose Arch. If those meetings did take place, and what the two witnesses, Mr. Masango and Ms. Daniels, say was said at that meeting is what was said. What would you make of that?
If that is correct, then it means it was influenced from outside.
Yes. Mr. Seleka,
Is it an opportune time?
from my side, I think I've covered most of what I really
What you wanted.
wanted Mr. Khoza to cover. But if you
Yes.
still have something, you can continue, so that when we finish, so I'm not taking the
Yes.
the tea break, but I think he has dealt with most of the things that I was
That you
really-
wanted, okay,
Yeah,
Chair.
yeah.
Just one more thing, Mr. Khoza. You, again, on the evidence of Mr. Kulani Koma, when you were acting as the chairperson of the board, and you had opportunity to call him to your house, you know he's detailed, he goes to your place, you talk about that advice he was giving you in regard to how you should handle Eskom. And in that meeting, is it that meeting or when you are driving somewhere, that you say to him about the suspended executives that you were involved in their exit negotiations and that they could have asked for more, but they didn't? Would you have given them more?
No. And let me talk about, because now you keep on harping on the Kulani Koma's information. Dr. Ngubane resigned on the 12th of April.
Who resigned on the 12th of April?
Dr. Ngubane resigned
Yes.
as a chairperson on the 12th
Of April
of April.
2017.
Yes. Midnight, there was a media released by Suzanne, even though it was maybe approved by the minister, but it
Ms.
was
Daniels.
released. Ms.
By
Daniels.
Ms. Daniels, yeah.
Yes. And that morning of the 13th, I haven't seen the email that when Dr. Ngubane resigned, that it was indicated that I would be acting in his place. So when I saw it in the morning, then I went to the office, and that's where I met Kulani, Mr. Koma. And Mr. Koma came to my office and just indicated the willingness to say we need to improve the reputation of the organization. And it is a time that maybe I can change if I want to leave a good legacy, and etc., etc., etc. Then I said, as a reputation manager, then I will welcome that. Please go and prepare it. And he went to prepare it, and I told him that on the weekend of the 17th, 18th, I will have a function at home. So I'm not going to be around because it was already planned. If anything urgent, then they can bring it home because I'll be at home at the weekend. So Kulani came in my place when I had a function, when I was so busy. There were certain documents that I signed. Then he briefly discussed to say he's going to send me the proposal that he has. But the proposal, it's based on the reputation damage that was caused by the Gupta emails and the people that emanate from it is Anoj, Singh, and Coco Mashela, and Brian Molife, etc. Then I said, okay, it's fine, we will look at it when we come back. And that was the end of the meeting. And all of a sudden now, he make up a long story on the issues to say, I went and spoke about the minister and all other things which were never discussed. And on the 18th, he sent a document. I could not open the document because I was busy that particular weekend. And when I opened the document, he had all sorts of other allegations and we were failing to do the fiducial duties of the board, etc., 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 which was not what we communicated, or whether we never discussed it. And he went further, and it was distributed to other board members that were my colleagues, and it was also distributed to the minister's office. and it eventually leaked to the media. It was his opinion, not attested by anyone, and now he added a lot of issues that were never discussed. So the issue of me discussing all what he talks about, the minister, myself, the Guptas, I don't know where it comes from. The only issue it was mentioned by him to say the most of reputation damage only occurred because of the leaked emails, and the leaked emails refer to the 3 people.
The point which I was raising with you is a different one, Mr. Khoza. He says that it was on or about 30 March 2017 that you were on your way with him to make an announcement on the KPMG results at Kuberg's social impact in the Western Cape. Mr. Khoza had bragged to me about how he led the charge on exiting the 3 Eskom executives, namely Tsolofelo Molefe, Dan Marukani, and Sidiso Matuna. Mr. Khoza said they all could have negotiated better offers, but appeared to be ready to leave as soon as possible. Mr. Khoza appeared very pleased with himself as he related the story. So that's the part
It's
I was raising
unfortunate,
with you.
it's unfortunate that that information is incorrect, Chairperson. I was not involved with Mr. Montona. I was not involved with Dan Marukane final settlement. I was not involved with the, the only involvement was with the Tsolofelo. And it was late as a request to the Chairperson to go and meet them. So I know it's impossible that I have said that. And there was no need, because we were all arguing. We all agreed to say it will be the 12-month settlement. That was a board resolution.
Of course, for what it's worth, you have already said you believe that the board didn't apply its mind properly with regard to the separation and the payment of the millions. But I just want to make the point that the fact that when it came to Ms. Molefe, the board was prepared to go far above the 12 months salary, seemed to reflect a determination to say we must make it possible for her to leave. So even when she rejects the 12 months that the others may have accepted, it looks like the board wanted to go not an extra mile, a lot of extra miles to make it possible for her to leave.
Okay.
You understand?
Yes, I understand from
Yes, yes, okay.
And in fact, Chair, they settled with her at 18 months, not 12 months.
Yeah, they settled at 18 months, yeah.
Yes.
No, the point I was making with Mr. Khoza is that while the others accepted 12 months, when it came to her, she wanted much more, and the board was prepared to give her much more, which seemed to reflect on the part of the board a determination that she should leave. You know, the board was prepared to go beyond what it was prepared to pay the others. So it doesn't reflect a board that wanted these executives back, because if she wanted more than 12 months, which had been agreed by the board, one would have expected the board to say, well, we'll give you the same thing, 12 months. If you don't want 12 months, come back. You understand that?
No, I understand.
Yes. And do you accept that that seems to have been the case?
Yes, that's correct.
You accept that, yeah. Okay, all right.
Thank you, Chair. Just two last things, Mr. Khoza. I do see from your affidavit you say you participated in Mr. Marukani and Molefe and Mr. Koko's meetings for exit. So those three you participated on, except Mr. Matuna.
Yes.
Yes. That's one. Number two is that Ms. Daniels talked about the board having determined to get rid of the executives, and she referred to the meeting, the minutes of the 23rd of April, 2015. 23 April 2015.
Yeah.
That's the meeting where the board approves the secondment of Mr. Molefe.
Okay.
Can you recall? But that's in the minutes. But the point I want to mention to you is how the board deals with the issue there of the suspended executives. So Ms. Klein is set in her capacity as the chairman of SES committee. That is what, Social and Ethics.
Social and ethics.
Reported that she had received a letter from the minister in which confirmation of the removal of the director was recorded. And I think they referred to Mr. Tsotsi there, because he's been removed now on the, removed or resigned 30 March
Yes.
2015. Now we are in April. Ms. Klein confirmed that the minister also raised a number of issues. The next paragraph, it was further reported that the minister had also requested that the process of removal, which was followed by the board, be noted. Ms. Klein also updated the board on developments regarding the possible settlement between Eskom and one of the suspended executives, who had requested that his suspension be changed to leave. And I think that's Mr. Matuna. Did you know that? At the CCMA, he said his suspension should be converted into a special leave.
Okay, no, I didn't.
You didn't know that. The board was unanimous in rejecting this proposal. But you were present at this meeting, so can you recall this was discussed? But it's in the minute. Let me go to the next point. It was also reported that whether the suspended executives resign or not, the independent inquiry into Eskom's affairs must continue as originally planned. It was pointed out that there may be a problem with the auditors refusing to sign off on the financial statements while the inquiry was proceeding, and that would result in serious matters of compliance. So Ms. Suzanne Daniels was saying that paragraph, that whether the suspended executives resign or not, the independent inquiry must continue, was one of the indications that the board expected the executives to go away. Already, well, on her version already in April, but I mean, we know there's evidence before then, but at least on her part.
Okay.
You see that?
I hear you.
Shall we don't? There is the issue about the acting appointments. I could touch on it.
Well, let me ask this before maybe. Would that be your last?
That will be the last.
Mr. Khoza, why did you and all the other members of the board kick Mr. Tsotsi out of the board?
Chair, the way you put it, as if we had votes to kick him out of the meeting.
Well, he resigned, but the fact of the matter is that the board made it very difficult for him to continue. As I understand the position, either it passed a vote of no confidence on him, or it was about to pass a vote of no confidence in him. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct.
And according to Dr. Ngubane, I think he and two other members of the board, and I don't know if you were one of them, were mandated by the board to talk to him, to try and, in effect, get for him a dignified way to get out of Eskom by resigning, which they did achieve. Were you one of the members who accompanied Dr. Angubane?
No, I was
You were
not
not,
there.
yeah. But did you pass a vote of no confidence, or you were on the verge of passing one if he did not resign?
It was mentioned in the discussion to say maybe we got the challenges with him, which emanated from the documents that he said he got documents, and when the documents were requested, did not come forth. And I think the other aspect were interference with the executives, and there were quite a number of issues that were raised, and unfortunately it was done by the audit and risk, and they listed them, and he was asked to respond on them. One of the issue, it was the Mr. Nick Linnell, who was brought to the board without the knowledge of the board, and we felt that there are more things that it was not communicated properly.
Let's take some of these. About Mr. Linnell, what was your problem as the board with?
The issue of Mr. Linnell,
Linnell.
when it was brought to our attention, my understanding, he was like a presidential resource that could be used because that's a person who's sitting with information. And down the line, it came back to say he was not contracted to Eskom as an employee or as a contractor or any process that has been followed to identify him. Yet he already started, according to what Mr. Sozi agreed or maybe testified here, to say the document of the 9th was already drafted by Linnell.
But you people, the board, were told by Mr. Tsotsi about Mr. Linnell, and you were happy to make use of his services. You had no problem. You didn't say, has he been contracted properly? Have procurement processes been followed? You didn't ask that, did you?
We did
Before
not
you
ask
used-
that.
Before you embraced his services.
It's correct on the day when he was introduced, because he was introduced as a solution to the problem that we were dealing with, the suspension of the executive.
Yes.
But on the 9th, he already started working
Yes.
before he even introduced in the board.
Yes.
But even when he was introduced in the board, he was introduced as a presidential resource.
Yeah. But,
Not a person that you're going to utilize, but it was just a person who's sitting with the information that's going to be utilized.
But what was your complaint against Mr. Tsotsi in connection with Mr. Linnell? Because I understood from the charges that were prepared by the board against Mr. Tsotsi, and from the evidence that has been given by Dr. Ngubane and maybe Ms. Clay, that as far as Mr. Linnell was concerned, the board's complaint was that Mr. Tsotsi had not followed procurement processes for Eskom to use Mr. Linnell's services. Was that your understanding of what the board's complaint was?
That's correct.
But you didn't ask as the board before using him on the 11th. You didn't ask Mr. Tsotsi, have you followed procurement processes?
When he introduced him, he said he was given resource by the presidency. And he has been looking at the parastatals, and he's got lots of documents that he's sitting with. So he was not the person who's supposed to be employed by. At the time, my version of understanding at the time was that he was not going to be employed by Eskom.
Yes.
But however, he was going to be used as a resource that
Yes.
come from the
Yes.
the presidency.
Yes.
But later, it was not the fact,
Yes.
because then it was then you were supposed now to be seen as a consultant
Yes.
that now is helping us on the process.
But you didn't seek to have any confirmation about him being employed by the presidency or appointed by the presidency, or being somebody who would be paid by the presidency as at the 11th, isn't it?
No, at the 11th it wasn't. But I
Yes.
think as later, because it came up on a very hot meeting and
Yeah.
tense situation that was there, and he introduced him in that space.
Yeah.
And he was going to deal with certain issues. At the time, then nobody asked the questions. And I
Yes.
think after that,
Yes.
then people start following it up. Then it was realized that it did not come up correctly. So he was just being imposed on us.
As well, one, you, Mr. Tangubane and Ms. Klein didn't say what you are saying when this was put to them, namely, we thought he would be paid by the presidency, because I think that's what in effect you are saying. You know, that's not what they said. From, as far as I recall, from their evidence, what emerged is an acceptance that they did use the services of Mr. Linnell on the 11th and after, whether it was the full board or the PNG or other committee. He was allowed to make a contribution and so on. And then suddenly the board blames Mr. Tsotsi and doesn't blame itself for making use of his services without first checking whether procurement processes had been followed. That's problematic, don't you agree? It's like you were just looking for something to use against Mr. Tsotsi, because you knew on the 11th as a board that if you are going to use somebody, there may be a need to follow procurement processes, but you didn't check before you used Mr. Linnell and said, allowed him to assist committees. You understand?
I understand, but as I said, I'm not aware of other meetings that he attended. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think he did, Mr. Selega.
Yes,
He
Chair.
did attend another committee or other committees.
He was invited a couple of times to the Dr. Pet Naidu's Build and Something program, that committee.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, what is it, Mr. Khoza?
That was built.
Yeah, the Build program. He
Yeah.
was invited to assist the PNG in regard to how do you, what process should be followed to present to give the person a notice to make representations before you suspend them. He advised on that. In fact, you took his advice on that. You took his advice on that.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was also the PNG and so.
yeah. So there is that problem. Then there was an issue of an allegation that he had issued a media statement without the approval of the board. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Was it one of the reasons?
It was one of the reasons, yes.
Yes. But when I asked Dr. Ngubane and Ms. Klein here, it appeared that they were not sure that he had done that, namely issue a wrong statement that should not have been issued. But also, I asked the question, why would the chairperson of the board issue to the media a media statement that he knew needed to be approved by the board first, issue it without the board approval? what would you be seeking to achieve? They didn't give me any satisfactory answer. Maybe you will give me. What would you be seeking to achieve?
I'm not aware of maybe the details of it, as I was
Yes.
acting at the time. Some of
Yes.
the preparation that they used to deal with him,
So you don't know about that part?
I don't know about the part.
So you certainly, your loss of confidence in him didn't relate to that because you didn't know anything about that? Or is the position that when the board dealt with this issue and was showing that it had lost confidence, you didn't take part in that because you were already acting
I
CEO?
was already acting, yes, I was not active at all.
Oh, okay, all right, okay. So you didn't take part in that?
I
Okay.
was there as a board member.
You
but
were
also
there, but you refrained from expressing any views?
a view.
Yeah, okay, all right.
And I think the board accepted that the statement had been leaked. You remember that, the discussion? It
Yes.
accepted that it had been leaked, and Leo Dlamini explained to the board. And the focus in the meeting shifted from Mr. Tsotsi to Leo Dlamini because he told the board that he had given a draft statement to the desk, media desk of Eskom. Recall that explanation? And now it was about whether is he the one who authorized the statement to be sent out before he could get the authorization of the board. So Mr. Tsotsi was left off the hook on that one. Well, not left off the hook, it sounds negative, but the board didn't seek to apportion blame on him. You remember that?
It's quite some time, but there was debate.
Yeah,
It
there
was-
was that.
Okay, all right. You wanted to quickly deal with the acting
The acting,
appointments?
yes.
If they won't take long.
They won't
we-
take long.
Yeah, because Mr. Khoza will come back for transactions, and some of the
yes.
things can be dealt with at that stage as well.
Mr. Khoza, in the meeting of the 19th of March, 19 March 2015, that's where Mr. Tsotsi is in trouble. The signs of him being in trouble. There's a note minuted there that the people who were acting in the place of the suspended executives were allegedly called into a meeting and knew beforehand that they would be acting. The board needed to find out how this happened. They were apparently called into a meeting and the acting CE met with them. This seems to have been an issue for the board, that they knew beforehand that they would be acting.
And there was an allegation that they had met with Mr. Khoza.
With Mr. Khoza, at this
Yeah.
time you are the acting CE.
Is there an allegation as to the date?
There is no date noted here.
Did
But-
you meet with them, Mr. Khoza?
No, not at all.
Are you sure?
I'm 100% sure.
Did you have a meeting on the morning of the 11th of March, that is the day of the suspensions?
Yes.
Maybe around 8 o'clock with Mr. Tsotsi and Mr. Abraham Masango, Ms. Valenti, Stroke Lamini, I don't know, I can't remember who else.
It was on the 12th,
Adrian
That was on the
Mabela.
12th?
not 11th.
Not on the 11th?
No.
Oh, so you had Mr. Masango's evidence about that part?
I had his evidence.
Oh, okay, so the meeting did take place, but it was not on the 11th?
It was on the
It was
12th.
on the 12th?
Yes.
Around about 8 o'clock?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all
Yes,
right,
early hours.
okay.
Where you were told that you would be, or you were asked to act in these positions.
That they were asked to be informed. You remember I was informed on the 11th.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
On the 11th, before they suspend people, I was asked to leave.
Yeah.
After they debated and they resolved, said I will be acting, then I was asked to leave, and Mr. Tsotsi then carried on to share the people in the government.
Yeah,
Oh, I see.
okay, all right.
Yes. You heard also Mr. Baloyi saying, you told him that you had been called into a meeting by officials of the DPE before the day of the suspensions, and apparently this meeting was to tell you about the suspensions and that you would be acting.
Not necessarily.
Or not necessarily?
Not necessarily.
Can you tell the chairperson?
I
what
think
was-
one of the people at the TPE called, but there was on the 11th, when the minister was on the way and was finding out to say there's a rumor to say people are going to be suspended. As the people in government, do I know anything? Then I said no.
That was on what date?
On the 11th,
On the 11th, or in
Yes.
the morning?
in the morning, yes,
Oh, okay.
Before the minister arrived?
before the minister arrived.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, Chair. That
That's
will be
it,
all from
yeah.
us, sir.
Okay, other matters can still be raised when you come back, because you will come back, Mr. Khoza, about the transactions.
No problem.
Yeah. So, thank you very much for coming to give evidence. We will, I will excuse you, but when you come back, whatever other matters haven't been covered will be covered.
Excellent.
Okay, you are excused.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Chair, we could then,
Is Miss Naidu here with her lawyer? Not yet.
my junior informs me that, Chair, they send an email asking that I inform them of the outcome of the postponement.
What kind of doing things is that?
Well, I had a communication with my learned friend, well, not my learned, the attorney for Ms. Naidu about the lateness of the affidavit. I said I will bring it before the chairperson. And
The lateness of their affidavit?
of,
of her
yeah,
affidavit?
of the affidavit we received yesterday. I think he waited for me to indicate what's the position going forward, hence this email.
But
chairperson.
wasn't Ms. Naidu supposed to be here when we started in the morning?
She was chair. Yeah, that's the email they sent. The email says what my junior has said to me.
It's unacceptable.
Yeah.
It's unacceptable. So why were they not here at 10 o'clock? Do you know?
Yesterday, chairperson, they had been told that there was uncertainty about proceeding today, but I corrected that. I said we will proceed. And he came back to me and said, well, okay, please tell me that we are coming. I said, yes, but now I've seen your affidavit, which is so many pages long. Let me ask the chairperson, but you will be scheduled to proceed in the afternoon. Your client is scheduled to proceed in the afternoon. I indicated the time, which is 1400.
Oh, so maybe they were expecting that if their
will be
evidence proceeded, they would be here
Here
at
at
2.
1400. I think that may well be so because.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll adjourn her evidence, and then another date must be arranged.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, we are going to adjourn for the day.
Thank you, Chair.
And tomorrow I will hear evidence relating to McKinsey. We adjourn.
Thank you, Chair.